The Viridian Nexus space station hung like a gleaming silver pendant against the velvet backdrop of space, its luminous rings rotating slowly around the central hub. This neutral outpost served as the most prominent diplomatic and commercial junction between the Terran Federation and the powerful but enigmatic Cthar Empire. Despite the peace treaty signed 3 years ago, tensions simmered beneath the veneer of civility, like a dormant volcano awaiting the slightest tremor to erupt. Security Commander Kalen Reyes stood at parade rest, his posture impeccable as he faced the Cthar delegation advancing down the polished corridor. His dark uniform, adorned with minimal rank insignia, contrasted sharply with the elaborate, iridescent garments of the approaching party. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders. Maintaining order on this station wasn't merely a job, but a mission critical to preserving the fragile peace between two species that had nearly annihilated each other just a few years prior. Kalen's military background was evident in every controlled movement, every calculated gesture. His reputation for iron composure preceded him across the station. Crew members often joked that he must have ice water in his veins, but they respected him for it. That unwavering calm had saved lives during the border skirmishes before the treaty, and now it maintained the delicate balance of power on Viridian Nexus. At the center of the approaching Cthar delegation walked Princess Lyra of House Zor, daughter of Ambassador Zor and a royal in her own right. Her skin had the characteristic pale blue tint of her species, covered in almost imperceptible scales that caught the light like opals. Her eyes, vertical pupilled and the color of burnished gold, surveyed the Terran section of the station with barely concealed disdain. Lyra was accustomed to adoration and immediate compliance. On her homeworld, she commanded attention not just through her royal status, but through the force of her personality. The princess possessed the typical Cthar temperament, fierce, proud, and accustomed to dominance, but hers burned particularly bright. What most Terrans didn't know was that she also carried a subtle version of her species' empathic abilities, allowing her to sense emotional currents, though she often ignored them in favor of her own desires. "Commander Reyes," she said, her voice lilting with the musical accent of her people as she stopped before him. "I require access to the Level 7 research quadrant for myself and my entourage." Kalen maintained his neutral expression. "May I ask the purpose of your visit to a restricted area, Your Highness?" Lyra lips curled slightly. "Must there be a purpose beyond my desire to see it? We have heard of the interesting artifacts recovered from the Orion Drift. Surely a brief cultural excursion would not violate your precious security protocols." Kalen knew exactly what she was referring to, the ancient technology recovered from the derelict ship found in neutral space. The artifacts were still being analyzed and were considered highly sensitive, potentially dangerous even, given their unknown capabilities. "I'm afraid I must deny your request, Your Highness. The artifacts from the Orion Drift are under quarantine and analysis. No visitors are permitted, regardless of diplomatic status." His voice remained respectful but firm. The Cthar guards flanking Lyra shifted their weight, their hand talons flexing slightly. The princess's golden eyes narrowed to slits. "Is that your final decision, Commander?" Her voice had dropped several degrees in temperature. "It is, Your Highness. Station regulations are explicit on this matter." Lyra took a step closer, invading the personal space that humans typically guarded so carefully. Standing nearly as tall as Kalen, she looked directly into his eyes, searching for weakness. "You Terrans and your regulations. Such a young species, barely crawling from your planetary cradle. Yet you presume to dictate terms to those who sailed the stars when your ancestors were still discovering fire." Her voice carried not just anger, but a cultural arrogance that had fueled decades of interspecies conflict. "Do you know who I am, Commander?" "Princess Lyra of House Zor, daughter of Ambassador Zor," Kalen replied evenly. "Your status is recognized and respected on this station, Your Highness, but cannot supersede security protocols established by mutual agreement between our governments." Her golden eyes flashed dangerously. You speak to me of agreements while barring access to artifacts that may well belong to Cathar heritage? We have discussed these cultural exchanges in the treaty negotiations. The artifact's origin remains undetermined, Your Highness. Until their nature and safety are established, the research quadrant remains restricted to authorized personnel only. Kalen kept his tone even, but he recognized the danger signs in her posture. The slight forward tilt, the stiffening of her shoulder ridges visible through her robes. Your servant. A functionary, she hissed, her accent becoming more pronounced with her rage. Your people are upstart servants in the cosmic order, playing a diplomacy while barely understanding the forces at work. I am royalty. My bloodline stretches back 10,000 years. I will not be denied by a glorified doorkeeper. The corridor had gone quiet, Terran personnel watching from a safe distance, the princess's own guards looking increasingly uncomfortable. Kalen remained unmoved. My answer remains the same, Your Highness. I can arrange for a formal request to be submitted through proper channels, or perhaps schedule a visit once the artifacts are cleared for. The movement was so sudden that even Kalen, with his trained reflexes, had only an instant to register it. Lyra Za lunged forward, her face contorting with fury, and spat directly into his face. The spittle landed on his cheek, warm and slightly viscous, carrying the faint metallic scent particular to Cathar biology. Time seemed to freeze. The Cathar guards tensed, clearly expecting violent retaliation. Terran personnel along the corridor gasped or reached instinctively for weapons that station regulations forbade them from carrying in diplomatic areas. But Kalen didn't rage. He didn't shout. He didn't even wipe the spittle from his face. Instead, in a fluid sequence of movements that spoke of years of close combat training, he pivoted, stepping to Lyra Za's side while simultaneously capturing her wrist and spinning her body in a control maneuver that placed her back against his chest. Before she could react, his free hand had drawn a clean white cloth from his pocket and effectively gagged her, covering her mouth firmly, but without violence. The entire sequence took less than a minute and happened in near silence. Just the soft sound of fabric and the muted gasp from the princess as she found herself restrained. Lyra Za's eyes widened in shock. Never in her life had anyone dared to handle her this way. Her guards stood frozen, their training insufficient to prepare them for this unprecedented situation. A Terran security chief restraining their princess, yet doing so with such clinical precision that it could not be clearly interpreted as an attack. Kalen held her immobile, his breath steady against her ear, the cloth firm against her mouth. Not hurting her, but ensuring she could neither speak nor spit again. Their eyes met in the reflection of a nearby view screen, and something passed between them, a current of surprise, fear, and something else. Something neither of them had anticipated. In Lyra Za's golden eyes, shock gave way to a flash of something more complex. A grudging recognition, perhaps even a flicker of respect, buried beneath layers of outrage and wounded pride. For the first time in her privileged life, someone had set a boundary she couldn't cross with impunity. Kalen held her gaze in the reflection, his expression unchanged, waiting patiently for her next move in this dangerous diplomatic dance. The silence in the corridor stretched like an over-tightened wire ready to snap until a deep voice broke it. What is the meaning of this? Ambassador Zor's commanding presence filled the corridor as he approached, flanked by his senior advisors and the Terran station manager, Elisa Vega. The ambassador's imposing height and ceremonial armor made even Kalen appear diminutive by comparison. Kalen released Lyra Za immediately, but maintained a position of readiness. The princess spun away from him, ripping the cloth from her mouth, her chest heaving with indignation. This human dared to lay hands on me, she spat, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. He refused my reasonable request to visit the research quadrant and then assaulted me when I expressed my displeasure. Station Manager Vega stepped forward, her dark eyes flicking between Kalen and the Cathar royalty. Commander Reyes is one of our most disciplined officers. I find it difficult to believe he would act without severe provocation. Kalen maintained his stance. Princess Lyrazie requested access to a restricted area containing unstudied artifacts. When I explained that regulations prohibited such access, she responded by spitting in my face. I restrained her to prevent further escalation. The corridor fell silent again as Ambassador Zor regarded his daughter, his expression unreadable to human eyes, but conveying volumes to Lyrazie, who visibly stiffened. "Is this true, daughter?" he asked, his voice resonating with subtle harmonics that human vocal cords could never produce. Lyrazie's gaze dropped momentarily before meeting her father's again. "He was disrespectful in his refusal," she said, avoiding a direct answer. Ambassador Zor turned to Manager Vega. "I request a private meeting to discuss this incident. The diplomatic lounge, perhaps." 15 minutes later, Kalen stood at attention before a small gathering of the highest-ranking officials on the station. The diplomatic lounge's panoramic windows displayed the slow dance of stars and ships, but no one was admiring the view. Ambassador Zor sat across from Manager Vega, while Lyrazie stood near her father, still smoldering with anger. Security Chief Reyes maintained his position near the door, face impassive. "The situation is delicate," Ambassador Zor began, his voice carrying the measured tones of a seasoned diplomat. "What happened today could be interpreted many ways, depending on the cultural context." Manager Vega nodded. Commander Reyes was following protocol regarding restricted areas. However, the physical contact is concerning, regardless of provocation. In human culture, Kalen spoke for the first time since entering the room. Spitting on someone is considered one of the most profound insults possible, a direct challenge and provocation. Ambassador Zor inclined his head. Among the Kthar, it is much the same. A grave insult, usually preceding violence. He turned his golden gaze to his daughter, one unbecoming of royalty. Lyrazie stiffened but remained silent. "What concerns me more," the ambassador continued, "is Commander Reyes's response." His multifaceted eyes studied Kalen with new interest. "In Kthar tradition, to be silenced and restrained as you did to my daughter, quickly, efficiently, without excessive force, carries significant cultural meaning." Manager Vega leaned forward. "What kind of meaning, Ambassador?" "It signifies recognition of the offender as a worthy opponent, someone deserving of controlled response rather than dismissal or brutality." The ambassador's mouth formed what might have been a Kthar approximation of a smile. In ancient times, when warrior houses competed for territory, such a response was sometimes the first step in complex mating rituals, marking a potential bond between equals. Lyrazie made a strangled sound of protest, while Kalen's composure finally cracked, his eyes widening slightly. "I assure you, Ambassador, that was not my intention," Kalen said carefully. "I was simply using minimum necessary force to prevent escalation." "Intentions aside, perceptions matter in diplomacy," Ambassador Zor replied. "And the perception among my retinue who witnessed this event is complicated. Some might see it as an insult to Kthar royalty. Others, more versed in our ancient ways, might interpret it as something else entirely." Manager Vega massaged her temples. "What do you suggest, Ambassador? We cannot afford a diplomatic incident when relations are still so fragile." Ambassador Zor's expression became contemplative. "I believe I have a solution that would satisfy Kthar honor while addressing your security concerns." He paused, ensuring he had everyone's attention. "Commander Reyes should be assigned as my daughter's special security advisor and escort during her stay on Viridian Nexus." The reaction was immediate and vociferous. "Absolutely not," Lyrazie exclaimed. "Sir, with all due respect," Kalen began simultaneously. Manager Vega raised a hand for silence. "Ambassador, are you suggesting that the man who just restrained your daughter should now be your personal guard?" "Precisely," Ambassador Zor replied, seemingly unperturbed by the outburst. "In Kthar culture, this would be seen as both a penalty and an honor for Commander Reyes, tasked with protecting someone he has, in a sense, claimed responsibility for through his actions. For my daughter, it provides structure and introduces her to human security protocols firsthand. His gaze hardened almost imperceptibly, which she clearly needs to understand better. This is absurd, Lyra Za hissed. I will not be shadowed by this human, this glorified security drone. You will, her father replied, the harmonics in his voice shifting to a register that brooked no argument. Consider it part of your diplomatic education. Kalen stepped forward. Manager Vega, I must protest. My duties as security chief require my full attention. I cannot be reassigned as a personal escort, even for a diplomatic dignitary. Vega studied him for a long moment, then glanced at the ambassador. How long would this arrangement need to continue? Until the end of our diplomatic mission, approximately 3 weeks, Ambassador Zor replied. Consider it a cultural exchange of sorts. Commander Reyes will learn about Cathar diplomatic needs firsthand, and my daughter will gain appreciation for Terran security concerns. The unspoken subtext was clear to everyone in the room. This solution would prevent the incident from escalating into something that could damage the fragile peace treaty. Politics, as always, would override personal preferences. Manager Vega sighed. Commander Reyes, effective immediately, you are assigned as Special Security Advisor to Princess Lyra Za for the duration of the Cathar diplomatic mission. Lieutenant Sharma will assume your regular duties temporarily. Kalen's jaw tightened, but years of military discipline held. Understood, ma'am. Lyra Za turned away in disgust, staring out at the stars as if they might offer some escape from this humiliation. Excellent, Ambassador Zor said, rising to his impressive height. I believe this arrangement will prove educational for everyone involved. Neither Kalen nor Lyra Za responded, both silently contemplating the uncomfortable weeks ahead. As the meeting adjourned, they found themselves walking side by side through the corridor, maintaining a careful distance, neither willing to acknowledge the other's existence. Yet beneath their mutual resentment, something unacknowledged stirred. A reluctant curiosity about the being who had, for the first time in either of their lives, forced them to confront an equal they could neither ignore nor easily dominate. The next morning found Kalen outside Lyra Za's quarters precisely at 0800 hours, his uniform impeccable, his expression neutral. When the door finally slid open after his third notification chime, the princess stood before him in what appeared to be Cathar loungewear, deliberately incomplete, as if to emphasize she had no intention of accommodating his schedule. You're early, she said, though they both knew he was exactly on time. Your itinerary indicates a tour of the agricultural biomes at 0830, Kalen replied, refusing to engage with the provocation. Protocol suggests arriving with sufficient time for security scans and transit. Lyra Za leaned against the doorframe, studying him with mock fascination. Do you ever speak like a normal person, Commander? Or does everything pass through some internal regulation filter first? A flicker of annoyance crossed Kalen's face before disappearing beneath his professional mask. I communicate as my position requires, Your Highness. How utterly fascinating, she drawled, then turned and disappeared into her quarters, leaving the door open. Not quite an invitation, but not a dismissal either. Kalen remained in the corridor, his training preventing him from entering without explicit permission. After several minutes, Lyra Za reappeared, now dressed in flowing garments of iridescent fabric that caught the light with each movement, her ceremonial jewelry denoting her royal status. Well, she challenged, aren't you going to scan me for weapons, or whatever it is you're so concerned about? That won't be necessary, he replied calmly. Station sensors already completed those scans. However, I would recommend leaving the ceremonial dagger. Bladed weapons are prohibited in the agricultural biomes due to contamination protocols. Her eyes widened fractionally. She hadn't mentioned bringing her family's ritual blade, concealed beneath her outer robe. You presume much, Commander. I observe much, Your Highness. There's a difference. For a moment, something like genuine curiosity flickered across her features before she masked it with disdain. She removed the ornate dagger from its hidden sheath and placed it ostentatiously on a side table. Satisfied? "Thank you for your cooperation," he replied formally, gesturing toward the corridor. "Shall we proceed?" Their walk to the agricultural biomes was conducted in tense silence, station personnel giving them a wide berth. The previous day's incident had already spread through Viridian Nexus's efficient rumor network, generating curious glances and whispered conversations that ceased abruptly when they approached. "Your people aren't exactly subtle with their gossip," Lyra ZA observed as they entered the transit tube. "Neither are yours," Kalen countered, nodding toward a group of Cthar diplomats who were making no effort to hide their interest in the unlikely pair. A reluctant smile tugged at the corner of Lyra ZA's mouth. "At least my people have the decency to speculate in a language you can't understand." Asterisk Chevrak Nathvi Zalar asterisk. Kalen responded quietly in perfect Cthari, causing Lyra ZA to stop mid-stride and stare at him in shock. The phrase, roughly translating to "honor walks with awareness," was an ancient Cthar proverb about maintaining dignity while remaining alert to one's surroundings. "Where did you learn to speak our language?" she demanded. "During the border conflicts," he answered simply. "I believed understanding the enemy was essential to protecting my people. After the peace treaty, I continued my studies. So I remain the enemy to be studied." Her voice carried a challenge. Kalen met her gaze directly. "You remain someone I need to understand, Your Highness. Whether as adversary or ally depends largely on your choices." Before she could respond, they arrived at the agricultural biomes, where Dr. Lakshmi Patel, the station's lead xenobotanist, greeted them with professional enthusiasm that barely masked her curiosity about the mismatched pair. "Princess Lyra ZA, Commander Reyes, welcome to Biome 7, Dr. Patel said, gesturing toward the massive, transparent dome where carefully controlled ecosystems flourished. "We've prepared a special tour of our adaptive hybridization projects, focusing on the plants with potential applications in both Terran and Cthar medicine." The tour proceeded with surprising smoothness, Lyra ZA demonstrating unexpected knowledge of botanical sciences that appeared to genuinely impress Dr. Patel. Kalen maintained a respectful distance, observing the princess's interactions with the scientific staff. "Your knowledge of cellular adaptation mechanisms is quite advanced," Dr. Patel remarked as Lyra ZA correctly identified the modified enzyme pathways in a hybrid plant. The princess inclined her head slightly. "My secondary education focused on biological sciences before my diplomatic training began. Some interest persists despite one's assigned path." Kalen filed this information away, reassessing his understanding of the princess. Not merely a spoiled royal, then, but someone with scientific aptitude deliberately channeled into politics, perhaps against her preferences. The peaceful tour was interrupted by the sudden blaring of alarms. Emergency lights flashed red throughout the biome as automated systems announced. "Containment breach in Section 12. All personnel evacuate immediately. Sealing procedures will commence in 2 minutes." Dr. Patel's face paled. "Section 12. That's the adaptive fungi research. Some of those spores are potentially harmful if inhaled. We need to move now." Chaos erupted as research staff and visitors began rushing toward the exits. Kalen immediately took charge, his voice cutting through the panic. "Everyone move calmly toward the primary airlock in single file," he commanded, positioning himself to direct traffic. "Dr. Patel, lead the way. Your Highness, stay close." Most obeyed without question, responding to the authority in his voice. But as the evacuation proceeded, Kalen noticed Lyra ZA was no longer beside him. Scanning the crowd, he spotted her moving in the wrong direction, toward a side chamber where an elderly Cthar researcher had collapsed, struggling to breathe as purplish spores began filling the air around them. Without hesitation, Kalen pushed through the retreating crowd, reaching Lyra ZA just as she knelt beside the fallen scientist. "This is Professor Techner," she explained urgently. "He has respiratory vulnerabilities from the Cygnus conflict. We can't leave him." Kalen assessed the situation instantly. The professor was too heavy for Lyra's to carry alone, and the spreading spore cloud was growing denser. "Cover your mouth and nose," he ordered, tearing a strip from his uniform sleeve and handing it to her, before doing the same for himself. Then he lifted the elderly Kthar in a firefighter's carry, his muscles straining under the weight of a being nearly twice as dense as a human. 60 seconds to sealing, the automated system announced as they moved as quickly as possible toward the exit, the air growing increasingly purple with potentially toxic spores. "The filters won't engage until sealing completes," Lyra's EA said between labored breaths. "The spores are designed to be resistant to standard containment procedures." Kalen nodded grimly, focusing on each step, his lungs beginning to burn from the effort of carrying the professor while trying not to inhale deeply. They reached the airlock with 20 seconds to spare, joining the last of the evacuees. As the door sealed behind them and decontamination procedures began, Lyra's helped lower Professor Techner to the floor, where medical personnel immediately attended to him. Then, to Kalen's surprise, she turned her attention to him. "You're bleeding," she said, gesturing to his arm where the makeshift mask had exposed a laceration from a broken specimen container he'd brushed against during their escape. "It's nothing," he replied, the adrenaline still coursing through his system. She ignored his dismissal, tearing a clean section from her elaborate outer robe, an action that would have been unthinkable for Kthar royalty under normal circumstances, and bound the wound with surprising skill. "Potential fungal contamination," she explained clinically. "Better contained than spreading." Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the hostility between them dissolved, replaced by the shared experience of having faced danger together. Something shifted in their dynamic, a reluctant acknowledgement of competence, perhaps even the foundations of respect. The moment was interrupted by medical personnel insisting both of them undergo full decontamination and examination for spore exposure. As they were separated for treatment, Kalen caught Lyra's looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher, but it certainly wasn't the disdain she'd shown earlier that morning. The following days established an uneasy routine. Kalen accompanied Lyra's to diplomatic functions, scientific exchange programs, and cultural events. Their interactions remained formal, but gradually lost the sharp edge of hostility. Occasional glimpses of the person beneath the royal facade emerged. Her quick wit during a tense negotiation, her genuine interest when visiting the station's advanced research facilities, her barely concealed boredom during pompous ceremonial functions. For her part, Lyra's began observing Kalen with growing curiosity. The rigid commander occasionally revealed unexpected depths, his extensive knowledge of both Terran and Kthar history, his quiet assistance to junior officers struggling with protocols, his subtle humor that emerged in rare, unguarded moments. One evening, after a particularly tedious diplomatic reception, Lyra's surprised Kalen by inviting him into her quarters for a traditional Kthar tea ceremony, an honor rarely extended to non-Kthar. "You've spent 8 days following me everywhere," she explained as she prepared the bitter, aromatic brew. "Yet I realize I know very little about you beyond your function." Kalen accepted the ceremonial cup with proper Kthar etiquette, inclining his head and receiving it with both hands. "What would you like to know, Your Highness?" "For starters, you could call me Lyra's when we're not in public," she suggested, settling across from him. "And perhaps explain how a man with your obvious intelligence and capabilities ended up as a security chief on a diplomatic outpost. You could command a warship, I suspect." Something darkened in Kalen's eyes. "I commanded the TSV Intrepid during the Battle of Proxima Centauri." Understanding dawned on Lyra's face. The Battle of Proxima Centauri had been one of the bloodiest engagements of the war, with heavy casualties on both sides. "You survived when many didn't. I made decisions that ensured our mission succeeded," he said carefully. "Not all my crew returned home. And you carry that weight still," she observed, not a question, but a statement. Kalen sipped the bitter tea, welcoming its burn. "We're shaped by our choices, especially the difficult ones." "Indeed." She studied him over the rim of her cup. Is that why you chose this position? Penance of some kind. I chose this position because building peace is harder than waging war, he replied. And because I believe my experience made me suitable for maintaining security in a place where one mistake could reignite conflict. Lyrazier nodded slowly. A warrior choosing to become a guardian. There's honor in that path. After a moment's hesitation, she added, I was not meant for diplomacy, you know. My training was in xenobiology. I had hoped to join the Royal Science Academy. What changed? My elder sister died 3 years ago. Suddenly, I was next in line for diplomatic succession. She traced the rim of her cup. House Zor has provided the Empire's chief diplomats for 15 generations. Personal preferences are irrelevant against family duty. Yet you maintain your scientific interests, Kaelin observed, recalling her knowledge in the agricultural biomes. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. When possible, my father allows it as a hobby. The conversation shifted to safer topics. The architectural uniqueness of Viridian Nexus, the curious customs that had developed among its multicultural population, the challenges of translation between their respective languages. By the time Kaelin departed for his own quarters, something fundamental had changed between them. Not friendship exactly, but a tentative mutual recognition. The next morning, Lyrazier was unusually quiet during their walk to a scheduled meeting with the station's engineering team. Something troubles you, Kaelin observed as they entered a rarely used maintenance corridor, a shortcut he'd selected for security reasons. She glanced at him sharply. What makes you say that? 7 silent minutes. A record in our acquaintance. The slight upward curl of his lip might almost have been a smile. Despite herself, Lyrazier laughed, a genuine sound without the usual barbs or mockery. Perhaps you're more observant than I gave you credit for. She hesitated, then added more seriously. I received a message from home this morning concerning news about a genetic condition affecting our royal line. Kaelin's expression sobered. Is your father ill? Not yet, but the markers are appearing. It's a degenerative neural condition that has plagued House Zor for generations. She kept her voice steady with visible effort. There were rumors of a cure, or at least a treatment, developed using technology similar to the artifacts discovered in the Orion Drift. Understanding dawned. That's why you were so insistent on accessing the research quadrant. She nodded, a flash of her former defiance returning. Not for shopping or entertainment, as your people probably assumed. The artifacts might contain cellular regeneration technology that could help my father, and eventually me. Kaelin was silent for a moment, processing this new information. Why didn't you simply explain this to station management? Medical research cooperation is explicitly permitted in the treaty. Pride, she admitted quietly, and politics. Revealing a genetic weakness in the royal line could be exploited by rival houses. My father forbade me from making an official request. Before Kaelin could respond, the lighting in the corridor suddenly shifted to emergency red, and the station's artificial gravity fluctuated momentarily. That's not a scheduled systems test, he said, immediately alert. Something's wrong. His communicator activated with an urgent message from Lieutenant Sharma. Commander, we have an unauthorized access attempt in the research quadrant. Security protocols have been compromised. Unknown hostiles are. The message cut off abruptly. Kaelin's training took over. We need to get you to a secure location, he told Lyrazier, already calculating the safest route. The research quadrant. That's where the Orion artifacts are stored, she said, her eyes widening. If someone's trying to steal them, then station security will handle it, he finished firmly. My priority is your safety. But Lyrazier wasn't listening. Her eyes had taken on a distant, unfocused quality that Kaelin had never seen before. I can feel them, she whispered. 3 minds, focused, determined. Not Thar, not human. Something else. They're after specific artifacts, the neural interface components. Kaelin stared at her in shock. You're telepathic? Not exactly. Alkthar royalty have some empathic abilities. Mine are usually limited to sensing strong emotions in close proximity. She focused on him again. But something about this station Perhaps the artifacts themselves has been amplifying my sensitivity since we arrived. Before Kalen could process this revelation, his communicator crackled back to life with Lieutenant Sharma's voice, now tense with suppressed pain. Hostiles identified as Arabian mercenaries. 3 confirmed, possibly more. They've deployed neural disruptors and have taken control of the research lab. Dr. Sengupta is injured. They're extracting the neural interface artifacts and preparing to the communication cut off again. Kalen made a split-second decision that went against every protocol and regulation. How accurately can you sense these intruders? Clearly enough to track their movements, I think, Lyra ZA replied, understanding immediately what he was considering. But we need to get closer. There's a security override panel in Junction 47B. I can reroute systems from there, possibly trap the intruders between security bulkheads. He studied her with new intensity. This violates every security protocol regarding diplomatic personnel. She met his gaze unflinchingly. I'm volunteering, Commander. Those artifacts might save my father's life, and they certainly shouldn't fall into mercenary hands. With a curt nod, Kalen led the way through the maintenance corridors, moving swiftly but silently. Lyra ZA kept pace easily, her Kthar physiology giving her natural advantages in speed and endurance. They reached the junction panel, and Kalen's fingers flew over the controls, bypassing security protocols with his override codes. Station schematics appeared on the small screen. The mercenaries are here, Lyra ZA said, pointing to the main research lab. But there's a 4th presence I didn't sense before in the adjacent storage vault. Unconscious or injured, emotions muted. Dr. Sengupta, probably, Kalen muttered, continuing to work the controls. I can seal off the primary escape routes, but they'll detect the lockdown within minutes. We need a distraction. What if you triggered the artifact's containment protocols? Lyra ZA suggested. The sensitive items are kept in specialized fields. Disconnecting them improperly should trigger alarms and automatic response systems. Kalen glanced at her with newfound respect. That would work, but I need to be in the secondary control room to access those systems. He pointed to a location 3 junctions away. And we'd still need to know exactly when they're handling the artifacts to maximize confusion. I can tell you, she said confidently. Their emotional states spike when they interact with the artifacts, a mixture of greed and fear. It's distinctive. For a moment, Kalen hesitated, years of training and protocol warring with the tactical advantage her abilities offered. Then he nodded decisively. Let's move. They reached the secondary control room without incident, finding it deserted as station personnel followed emergency lockdown procedures. Kalen accessed the systems while Lyra ZA closed her eyes, focusing her empathic senses. They're starting to remove the neural interfaces now, she murmured after several tense minutes. The leader is handling them personally. His emotions are strange, not just greed. There's something almost reverent in his approach. Kalen's hands poised over the controls, waiting for a signal. Tell me when they've removed at least 2 components. That's when I'll be most vulnerable. Lyra ZA nodded, her face intense with concentration. Seconds stretched into minutes, the only sound their measured breathing and the soft hum of station systems. Now, she suddenly exclaimed, all 3 artifacts are disconnected from their containment fields. Kalen's fingers flew across the control panel, executing a precise sequence of commands. Throughout the research quadrant, alarms blared as containment field warnings activated. Simultaneously, he triggered emergency decontamination protocols, filling the laboratories with a dense, obscuring fog designed to neutralize potential biological contaminants. They're panicking, Lyra ZA reported, her eyes still closed, tracking the emotional signatures. The leader is trying to maintain control, but the others are disoriented. They're afraid the artifacts might be damaged by the decontamination procedures. Security teams will be responding to the containment breach, Kalen said, already moving toward the door. But they'll be following standard protocols, which these mercenaries may have anticipated. We need to approach from an unexpected direction. They moved swiftly through the maintenance corridors, Kalen retrieving an emergency security kit from a wall panel, containing a stun baton and protective gear. He offered the baton to Lyra ZA, who surprised him by shaking her head. Kthar royalty are trained in personal combat from childhood, she explained, flexing her fingers to reveal the retractable claws that most humans didn't realize Kthar possessed. I'm more effective without weapons. Kalen raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. They reached a service entrance to the research quadrant, pausing as Lyra ZA once again focused her empathic senses. They're splitting up, she whispered. Two are gathering the artifacts. One is setting explosive charges at the main entrance to delay security forces, and the fourth, she frowned in concentration. The fourth is awake now, moving toward an auxiliary communication panel. Dr. Sengupta, I think. She's terrified but determined. Kalen quickly recalibrated their approach. We need to reach Dr. Sengupta before the mercenaries realize she's conscious. She could trigger a station-wide alert that would bring more security forces. Too late, Lyra said grimly. The leader has sensed her movement. He's sending one of his team to intercept. Without further discussion, they burst through the service entrance, emerging into the fog-filled laboratory complex. Visibility was severely limited, but Lyra's moved confidently, guided by her empathic senses. Kalen followed closely, trusting her abilities despite every regulation warning against placing a diplomatic dignitary in danger. They rounded a corner just as a shadowy figure raised a weapon toward a crouching human form. Dr. Sengupta, her lab coat stained with blood from a head wound, desperately working at a communication panel. Kalen acted instinctively, hurling himself forward in a flying tackle that caught the mercenary mid-torso. They crashed to the ground, the mercenary's weapons skittering across the floor. The attacker, humanoid but with distinctive ridge patterns marking him as Arabian, fought with desperate strength, landing a solid blow to Kalen's ribs. But Kalen's combat training prevailed. With a practiced sequence of strikes, he subdued the mercenary, rendering him unconscious with a precise nerve strike. Dr. Sengupta, he said, turning to the scientist who was staring at them in shock. Are you all right? Commander Reyes? She managed, disbelief evident in her voice. And? Princess Lyra ZA? What are you? No time to explain, Kalen interrupted. Can you lock down the artifact storage from here? Dr. Sengupta nodded shakily. Yes, but they've already removed the primary neural interfaces. They're preparing to exfiltrate through the external maintenance airlock. Lyra ZA's head snapped up. They're moving now, coming this way. They've sensed our presence somehow. Kalen made a split-second decision. Doctor, secure yourself in the containment chamber and activate the emergency lockdown. We'll delay the mercenaries. Before the scientist could protest, Kalen and Lyra ZA were moving again, positioning themselves in the corridor that led to the maintenance airlock. The fog was beginning to dissipate, visibility improving just enough to make out shapes at a distance of a few meters. Two approaching, Lyra ZA murmured. The leader is elsewhere, probably securing there. Escape route. Kalen nodded, readying himself. Stay behind me. To his surprise, Lyra ZA moved to his side instead. We faced them together. Kthar do not hide behind their allies. There was no time to argue. Two figures emerged from the thinning fog, both carrying compact cases that presumably contained the stolen artifacts. They froze momentarily upon seeing Kalen and Lyra ZA blocking their path. Surrender the artifacts and your weapons, Kalen commanded, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. The mercenaries exchanged glances, then the taller one barked a harsh laugh. A security officer and a blue-skinned princess? Step aside if you want to live. In response, Kalen activated his stun baton, the weapon humming with energy. Beside him, Lyra ZA dropped into a combat stance he recognized from ancient Kthar martial forms. The mercenaries attacked simultaneously, the first firing a neural disruptor that Kalen barely managed to deflect with his baton. The second lunged at Lyra ZA, clearly expecting an easy victory against what he perceived as a sheltered royal. His mistake became immediately apparent as Lyra ZA moved with fluid grace, avoiding his strike and countering with a sweeping kick that sent him staggering. Her retractable claws flashed, slicing through his protective gear and drawing first blood. Kalen engaged the other mercenary, the cramped corridor limiting their movement but also preventing the attacker from using ranged weapons effectively. The fight was brutal and efficient, each combatant seeking any advantage in the confined space. A lucky strike sent Kalen's baton flying from his hand, but he continued without hesitation, switching to hand-to-hand techniques. The mercenary pulled a vibroblade, its edge humming with molecular cutting technology. Kalen barely avoided the first slash, feeling the heat of the blade as it passed centimeters from his face. Nearby, Lyra Za was holding her own, her natural Kthar abilities making her a formidable opponent despite her lack of formal combat experience. Her empathic senses gave her a fraction of a second's warning before each attack, allowing her to anticipate and counter her opponent's moves. The tide turned when Kalen, in a desperate maneuver, allowed the mercenary's blade to come dangerously close. Close enough to grab the attacker's wrist and execute a joint-breaking technique that left the vibroblade clattering to the floor and the mercenary howling in pain. Simultaneously, Lyra Za delivered a precise strike to her opponent's neural cluster, a Kthar combat technique targeting pressure points that few non-Kthar even knew existed. The mercenary collapsed immediately, nervous system temporarily overloaded. Breathing heavily, Kalen and Lyra Za exchanged a glance of mutual respect and accomplishment. They had functioned together with surprising effectiveness, their different combat styles complementing each other as if they'd trained together for years. The artifacts, Kalen said, retrieving the cases the mercenaries had dropped. Lyra Za nodded, but her expression suddenly changed to one of alarm. The leader, he's coming. And he's different. His mind feels wrong somehow. Before Kalen could respond, a new figure appeared at the far end of the corridor. Tall and gaunt, wearing an environment suit of unfamiliar design, the mercenary leader carried no visible weapons. Instead, attached to his temples were devices that resembled smaller versions of the stolen artifacts, neural interfaces of some kind. Fascinating, the leader said, his voice oddly modulated. A Terran security chief and a Kthar princess working in concert. How unexpected. Kalen positioned himself slightly in front of Lyra Za, the protective gesture instinctive. Surrender now. Station security forces will be here any moment. The mercenary leader smiled thinly. I think not. You've caused enough delays already. He raised a hand, and without touching any controls, the environmental systems in the corridor began to malfunction. Atmosphere thinning rapidly as oxygen was vented. He's interfacing directly with the station systems. Lyra Za gasped, already feeling the effects of the oxygen deprivation more acutely due to Kthar physiology. The neural technology, he's using it somehow. Kalen lunged forward, trying to reach the mercenary before the oxygen levels dropped further, but the leader made another gesture. Sudden, excruciating pain exploded in Kalen's head, a directed neural disruptor effect. He realized through the agony, channeled somehow through the leader's implants. He felt at his knees, vision blurring. Through the haze of pain, he saw Lyra Za similarly affected, her face contorted in agony as she struggled to remain conscious. The mercenary leader approached calmly, retrieving the artifact cases. Primitive beings, he said dismissively, you cannot comprehend the potential of this technology. It was never meant for your kind. As darkness threatened to engulf him, Kalen reached desperately for Lyra Za's hand. Whether seeking to protect her or draw strength from the contact, he couldn't have said. Their fingers intertwined, and in that moment of desperate connection, something extraordinary happened. The pain in Kalen's head suddenly diminished, replaced by a strange double awareness. His own thoughts and sensations overlaid with alien ones. Lyra Za's consciousness, he realized with shock. He could feel her pain, her determination, her fear, all mirroring his own. Lyra Za's eyes widened in similar realization. The mind link, she whispered, using the ancient Kthar term. It's activating. The mercenary leader paused, sensing the change. Impossible, he murmured, studying them with new interest. A spontaneous neural synchronization between different species. In that moment of distraction, Kalen and Lyrazier acted with perfect coordination, as if they'd planned the attack through detailed communication rather than the instinctive understanding flowing between them through the unexpected mental connection. Lyrazier projected a burst of concentrated pain and disorientation, amplified somehow by their link directly at the mercenary leader's mind. He staggered, his control over the station's systems faltering momentarily. Oxygen began flowing back into the corridor as the environmental controls reset to default parameters. Simultaneously, Kalen surged forward, ignoring his body's protests, and delivered a precise strike to the neural implants at the mercenary's temples. The devices sparked and the leader screamed, clutching his head as the interface malfunctioned. The mercenary collapsed, the neural feedback rendering him unconscious. Kalen secured the artifact cases while Lyrazier bound the leader with restraints from the fallen mercenary's equipment. As the immediate danger passed, they turned to each other, both shaken by what had transpired between them. "A mind link," Lyrazier said softly, her voice filled with wonder and trepidation. "I thought they were just legends from the ancient wars. A Cathar warrior and an enemy soldier, bound by mental connection in the heat of battle." Kalen could still feel her presence in his mind, fainter now that the immediate danger had passed, but undeniably there. Emotions, impressions, fragments of thoughts, not his own, flickered at the edges of his consciousness. "Is it permanent?" he asked, struggling to maintain his professional demeanor while experiencing the most profound violation of personal boundaries imaginable, and yet, paradoxically, not feeling violated at all. "I don't know," she admitted. "The ancient texts are unclear. Some links faded after the battle ended. Others persisted for life." Before they could discuss it further, station security forces finally arrived, Lieutenant Sharma leading a tactical team into the corridor. The lieutenant stopped short at the sight before him. Commander Reyes and Princess Lars standing amid 4 unconscious mercenaries, looking battered but victorious, the stolen artifacts secure beside them. "Commander?" Sharma asked uncertainly. "What happened here? We received conflicting reports and system malfunctions throughout the quadrant." Kalen straightened, resuming his role as security chief with visible effort. Oravian mercenaries attempted to steal artifacts from the research lab. They employed neural interface technology to bypass security systems. Princess Lyrazier provided crucial assistance in neutralizing the threat. Sharma's gaze shifted between them, clearly noting their disheveled appearance and the strange intensity with which they regarded each other. "Are you both all right?" "Medical teams are standing by." "We're fine," Lyrazier answered quickly, too quickly. "Just minor injuries." "The artifact should be secured immediately," Kalen added. "And I want the mercenaries held in separate high-security cells with neural dampening fields, especially the leader." As the security team moved to comply with his orders, Kalen and Lyrazier found themselves momentarily alone again. The link between them pulsed with unspoken questions and realizations. "We need to discuss this," Kalen said quietly, gesturing vaguely between them to indicate the mental connection. Lyrazier nodded, her golden eyes troubled. "Yes, but not here. And there's something else." She hesitated, then continued with reluctant honesty that Kalen suspected was influenced by their new inability to hide their true thoughts from each other. "When I touched the mercenary leader's mind through our link, I sensed something disturbing. He wasn't working alone. Someone within the station provided him with access codes and security protocols." Kalen's expression hardened. "An inside job. That explains how they bypassed the initial security measures so easily. And why they knew exactly which artifact to target," Lyrazier added. "The neural interfaces that could help with my father's condition. They're the same technology the leader was using to control station systems." Their eyes met in perfect understanding, the link between them humming with shared purpose despite the uncertainty of their new connection. Whoever had betrayed the station was still at large, and only they, bound by this unprecedented mental link, might have the unique advantage needed to uncover the traitor. "This isn't over," Kalen said grimly. "No," Lyra agreed, unconsciously moving closer to him, drawn by the strange comfort of their shared consciousness. "It's only beginning." The aftermath of the incident brought chaos and confusion to Viridian Nexus. Station Manager Vega convened an emergency meeting with Ambassador Zor and the station's department heads, attempting to make sense of the unprecedented attack. Kalen and Lyra, after brief medical examinations that revealed nothing about their mental connection, found themselves at the center of attention. "Let me understand this correctly," Manager Vega said, rubbing her temples as if to ward off an impending headache. "Princess Lyra sensed the intruders empathically, and the two of you decided, without authorization or backup, to confront armed mercenaries using experimental neural technology. We acted to protect station personnel and prevent the theft of sensitive artifacts," Kalen replied, maintaining his professional tone despite the distracting awareness of Lyra's thoughts flowing beneath his own. Ambassador Zor studied his daughter with unnerving intensity. "You employed empathic abilities you previously claimed were minimal," Lyra. "Explain." Lyra straightened, meeting her father's gaze. "The artifacts appear to amplify latent Kthar abilities. I've felt the effect since arriving on the station, but became more pronounced in proximity to the neural interfaces." She was telling a partial truth, Kalen realized. He could feel her deliberate omission of their mental link through the very connection she was concealing. The irony might have been amusing under different circumstances. Dr. Sengupta, her head now bandaged, leaned forward eagerly. "That aligns with our research findings. The artifacts appear designed to enhance neural connectivity and transmission. If Kthar empathic abilities operate on similar principles to the technology, proximity could indeed cause amplification." Ambassador Zor and Manager Vega exchanged significant glances. The implications for both species were profound and potentially problematic for the fragile peace. "What concerns me most," Lieutenant Sharma interjected, "is the security breach. The mercenaries had detailed knowledge of our systems and protocols, and their leaders' neural implants were clearly derived from the same technology as our artifacts, suggesting either theft of research data or an inside collaborator," Kalen concluded, voicing what everyone was thinking. "We'll need a full investigation," Manager Vega decided. "Complete security audit, background checks on all personnel with access to the research quadrant, communication logs, everything." Ambassador Zor nodded in agreement. "Kthar intelligence will cooperate fully. If someone is attempting to weaponize this technology or provoke conflict between our species, both our governments have equal interest in stopping them." Throughout the meeting, Kalen remained acutely aware of Lyra's presence, not just physically but mentally. Her thoughts and reactions flowed alongside his own, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in counterpoint, but always present. When their eyes occasionally met, he could sense her similar disorientation, the strange intimacy of their situation both unsettling and oddly reassuring. As the meeting concluded with assignments of investigative responsibilities, Ambassador Zor requested a private word with his daughter. Kalen moved to provide space, only to experience a sudden spike of anxiety from Lyra through their link. "Commander Reyes should remain," she said quickly. "As my security advisor, he should be privy to any concerns affecting my safety." Ambassador Zor's multifaceted eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. When the others had departed, he addressed Lyra in their native language, apparently unaware that Kalen could understand. "Asterisk, there is something you are not telling me, daughter." Asterisk, he said in Kthari. Asterisk, your aura patterns have changed. What truly happened in the research quadrant? Asterisk. Lyra hesitated, and Kalen felt her internal struggle through their connection. Duty to her father, and people warring with fear of the consequences should the truth be revealed. Asterisk, the artifacts respond to me. Asterisk, she finally said, choosing her words carefully. more strongly than expected. I believe they may indeed hold the key to treating the family condition, as we hoped. Not a lie, but not the complete truth. Kalen kept his expression neutral despite feeling her discomfort at the omission. Ambassador Zor studied her intently. And the Terran commander? His role in the situation seems unusual. He proved himself a capable warrior and ally. Lyrazier replied, a surge of genuine respect coloring her thoughts. Without his intervention, the artifacts would have been lost. After a long, assessing silence, Ambassador Zor switched to standard. Commander Reyes, it seems I underestimated your capabilities. Your service today will not be forgotten by House Zor. I was fulfilling my duty to the station and its inhabitants, Ambassador, Kalen responded formally, including Princess Lyrazier. Indeed, the ambassador's expression remained unreadable. Nevertheless, I believe this incident demonstrates the wisdom of your continued assignment as my daughter's security advisor. Perhaps you have more to teach each other than either of you initially believed. After the ambassador's departure, Kalen and Lyrazier finally found themselves truly alone in one of the station's observation lounges, the vast starfield visible through the panoramic windows, providing a sense of privacy despite the public nature of the space. He suspects something, Lyrazier said without preamble. Yes, Kalen agreed, relaxing slightly as they dropped the pretense of normalcy they'd maintained during the meetings. But he doesn't know what exactly. The mind link is considered almost mythical among my people, she explained, her mental presence anxious but also curious as she explored their connection. A phenomenon from the ancient wars, when Cathar warriors supposedly formed telepathic bonds with worthy enemies during moments of extreme stress or shared purpose. And now it's happened between us, Kalen said, still struggling to reconcile the rational, protocol-driven part of his nature with the inexplicable reality of sharing consciousness with another being, an alien princess, no less. Lyrazier's thoughts brushed against his, tentative yet increasingly familiar. I can sense your discomfort with the situation. Your mind values order, structure, boundaries. This connection violates everything you've built your identity upon. The accuracy of her assessment was unsettling. And you? How do you feel about having a human consciousness linked to yours? A complex swirl of emotions flowed through their connection. Curiosity, apprehension, a strange sense of relief, and underneath it all, a reluctant recognition of compatibility that surprised them both. It's not what I would have chosen, she admitted. But now that it's happened, I find myself more fascinated than repelled. Your mind is different from Kthar's, more compartmentalized, perhaps, but also more adaptive. There's a harmony I didn't expect. Kalen nodded slowly, understanding exactly what she meant, because he could feel the same quality in their mental interaction. Despite their differences, cultural, biological, experiential, their thoughts seemed to align and complement each other in ways that defied explanation. We need to understand the practical implications, he said, steering toward the concrete issues that felt safer than exploring the philosophical ramifications. How extensive is this link? How much can we perceive of each other's thoughts? Is there a range limitation? And most importantly, can it be reversed if necessary? Lyrazier closed her eyes, focusing on their connection. I can sense your surface thoughts clearly when we're in proximity like this. Deeper memories and knowledge seem accessible, but not automatically shared. I would need to deliberately reach for them, I think. Emotions flow more freely. She opened her eyes again. As for range and reversibility, I simply don't know. The ancient texts are more poetic than practical in their descriptions. We should test it, Kalen suggested, already formulating a systematic approach to understanding their new reality. Controlled experiments to determine the link's properties and limitations. A flicker of amusement colored Lyrazier's thoughts. So very Terran, immediately seeking to quantify and categorize the mysterious. Would you prefer we simply accept it without understanding it? He countered, though without real irritation. No, she conceded, especially since we still have a saboteur to identify. This connection could provide an advantage if we learn to use it effectively. The reminder of the immediate threat shifted their focus. Someone on Viridian Nexus had assisted the mercenaries, providing access codes and information about the artifacts. That person remained at large, potentially planning their next move. We should keep the existence of our link confidential, Kalen decided. It gives us an edge the traitor won't expect. Lyra ZA nodded in agreement. We need to review the security logs, interview key personnel, and determine how the mercenary leader obtained neural interface technology similar to the artifacts, Kalen finished her thought seamlessly. They both paused, momentarily startled by the natural completion of each other's sentences, a tangible manifestation of their shared consciousness. This will take some adjustment, Lyra ZA said with a wry smile. Agreed. Kalen allowed himself a rare, slight smile in return. But first, we have a conspiracy to unravel. Over the next several days, Kalen and Lyra ZA established a new rhythm, balancing their official duties with clandestine investigation into the security breach. Their mental link proved both asset and challenge, enabling unprecedented coordination, but also requiring constant attention to maintain appropriate boundaries. They discovered that distance did affect the connection. When separated by more than a few hundred meters, the vivid exchange of thoughts faded to a general awareness of each other's emotional state and well-being. This provided some relief from the intensity of shared consciousness, but also created an unexpected sense of loss that neither was entirely comfortable acknowledging. Working together, they methodically eliminated suspects, analyzing security logs, and conducting subtle interviews with personnel who had access to the research quadrant. They learned to communicate silently through their link, exchanging observations and insights without speaking aloud, a capability that proved invaluable during these conversations. Their investigation eventually led them to Dr. Malcolm Everson, a neurophysicist recently transferred to the station specifically to study the Orion artifacts. His credentials were impeccable, his behavior unremarkable. Yet something about him triggered a shared sense of dissonance when they interviewed him. His surface thoughts matched his words, Lyra ZA said as they discussed their findings in Kalen's office, away from potential eavesdroppers. But there was something beneath, a barrier of some kind. I couldn't penetrate it. Similar to how the mercenary leader's mind felt? Kalen asked, recalling the impression he'd received through their link during the confrontation. Related but different, less alien, more constructed. She frowned in concentration, like a mental shield designed specifically to block empathic probing, which would be an unusual precaution for a Terran scientist, Kalen observed, unless he had reason to expect such probing. They began digging deeper into Everson's background, using both official channels and Lyra ZA's diplomatic access to information systems. The discrepancies were subtle but significant. Research positions that couldn't be verified, publications cited but impossible to locate, colleagues who had only vague recollections of working with him. A manufactured identity, Kalen concluded, sophisticated enough to pass standard background checks, but notwithstanding focused scrutiny. Lyra ZA nodded, her thoughts aligning with his. The question is, who is he really working for? The Aravians? A corporate entity? A political faction within either of our governments? They were still pursuing these questions when the trap was sprung, not against them, but by them. Having identified Everson as their primary suspect, they deliberately leaked misinformation about a scheduled transport of the remaining artifacts to a secure facility off-station, timing it to force the conspirators' hand. The night before the supposed transport, they waited in the darkened research quadrant, their minds linked in heightened awareness, senses extended beyond normal human or Kthar capabilities through their combined consciousness. He's coming, Lyra ZA whispered, both aloud and mentally. Approaching from the east corridor. Not alone, there's another presence with him, but strange, mechanical somehow. Kalen nodded, positioning himself behind a storage unit, while Lyra ZA concealed herself near the ceiling, her natural Kthar agility allowing her to perch in the structural supports. Through their link, each maintained perfect awareness of the other's position and intentions, no verbal coordination necessary. Dr. Everson entered cautiously, scanning the laboratory with a handheld device. Beside him floated what appeared to be a maintenance drone, modified with unfamiliar components. He moved directly to the artifact containment units, his actions precise and confident. "Security override Theta 97 Epsilon," he murmured to the drone, which extended an interface probe toward the containment controls. Kalen and Lyra launched their ambush simultaneously from opposite directions. The scientist whirled in surprise, but the drone reacted with unnatural speed, extending defensive energy fields that forced them to dodge aside. "Neural security protocols active," the drone announced in a synthesized voice. "Intruders identified. Commander Kalen Reyes, Princess Lyra of House Zor. Threat assessment significant. Countermeasures engaged." The drone emitted a pulse of energy that Kalen recognized with horror as similar to the neural disruption the mercenary leader had employed. He braced for the expected pain, but instead felt Lyra's mind wrap protectively around his, their linked consciousness somehow deflecting the worst of the attack. Shield together, her thought came clearly through their connection. The link protects us. Understanding instantly, Kalen focused on strengthening their mental bond, creating a shared barrier against the neural assault. The drone's attack washed over them, but couldn't penetrate their combined defenses. Everson stared in shock. "Impossible. The disruptor should have incapacitated you both." Taking advantage of his surprise, Kalen lunged forward, disrupting the drone's systems with a targeted electromagnetic pulse from a device he'd prepared specifically for this confrontation. The machine faltered, its energy fields flickering. Simultaneously, Lyra dropped from her perch, landing directly behind Everson and immobilizing him with a precise Kthar martial arts hold. "Who are you really working for?" she demanded. The scientist struggled briefly, then went still, a strange smile spreading across his face. "You've bonded," he said, ignoring her question. "A human and a Kthar, sharing consciousness. Fascinating." The theoretical models suggested it was possible, but to see it actually manifested— "Answer the question," Kalen ordered, approaching with his weapon trained on the disabled drone. "I serve science, Commander. Something greater than your petty political concerns or tribal loyalties." Everson's voice took on a fervent quality. "The artifacts aren't weapons or medical devices. They're components of a communication system, one designed to connect minds across vast distances, across species barriers. Exactly like what's happened between you two, but on a galactic scale." Through their link, Kalen and Lyra shared simultaneous realizations. The implications of such technology for interspecies relations, for the evolution of consciousness itself, for the balance of power throughout known space. "The Convergence Institute," Everson continued, his expression almost reverent. "We've studied the artifacts for decades, preparing humanity and other species for the next stage of cognitive evolution. The mercenaries were never meant to steal the technology, merely to create the conditions of stress and danger that might trigger precisely what happened between you two. You orchestrated the attack," Lyra demanded, her grip tightening. "A calculated risk," Everson admitted without remorse. "We needed proof that spontaneous neural bonding was possible between species. You provided that proof. The next phase can now begin." Before either of them could respond, alarms blared throughout the laboratory. Station security had detected the energy fluctuations from the drone's attack and was responding. "This isn't over," Everson said, still wearing that unsettling smile. "You're just the beginning. The convergence is coming, whether your governments want it or not." Security forces burst into the laboratory, quickly securing Everson and the disabled drone. As Lieutenant Sharma coordinated the response, Kalen and Lyra exchanged troubled glances, their link humming with shared concern about the scientist's ominous statements. The aftermath of Everson's capture brought more questions than answers. The Convergence Institute appeared to be a shadowy, trans-species organization with cells throughout both Terran and Cthar space, dedicated to promoting the forced evolution of consciousness through technology. Everson himself revealed little during interrogation, maintaining the zealous certainty that history would vindicate his actions. Ambassador Zor and Station Manager Vega convened a joint committee to determine the fate of the artifacts, now understood to be even more significant and potentially dangerous than previously believed. The committee meetings were tense, political considerations constantly threatening to overwhelm scientific and ethical concerns. Throughout these deliberations, Kalen and Lyra maintained their public roles while privately exploring the ever-deepening mental connection between them. What had begun as an unexpected and unwelcome invasion of privacy had evolved into something neither could imagine living without, a profound communion of minds that transcended cultural and biological differences. The artifacts are too dangerous to remain in any single government's control, Lyra argued during a particularly heated committee session. They should be studied jointly, under strict oversight from both Terran and Cthar authorities. I concur, Kalen added, supporting her position with security analyses that emphasize the risks of unilateral possession. The technology's potential for misuse is too great. What neither of them publicly acknowledged was their personal stake in understanding the artifacts, both for the sake of Ambassador Zor's genetic condition and for insights into their own unprecedented neural bond. Through their link, they shared an unspoken hope that the correct application of the technology might help the ambassador while allowing them to maintain the connection they'd come to value. As the committee meetings concluded without clear resolution, Kalen and Lyra found themselves in the observation lounge where they'd first discussed their mental link. The stars beyond the viewports seemed especially brilliant, as if reflecting the clarity they'd found together despite, or perhaps because of, the challenges they'd faced. My father's condition is stable for now, Lyra said, watching the starfield. The preliminary research suggests the neural interface technology could indeed help him, if we can convince both governments to approve therapeutic applications while restricting military ones. Kalen nodded, feeling her complex emotions through their link, hope tempered by pragmatic assessment of the political realities. And us? Have you decided what you want regarding our connection? She turned to face him, her golden eyes meeting his with unwavering directness. I want to keep it, she said simply. It's no longer foreign or intrusive to me. It's part of who I am now, who we are. Relief washed through him, his own and hers, reflected back in an infinite recursive loop through their shared consciousness. Even knowing what it means for your future, for both our futures, the political complications alone are substantial, she finished, a smile touching her lips, but not insurmountable. In fact, the Convergence Institute, for all their misguided methods, had one thing right. Neural bonds between species could revolutionize diplomacy and interstellar relations. We're living proof of that. A test case for a new kind of connection between our peoples, Kalen mused, allowing himself to consider possibilities that would have seemed unthinkable weeks earlier. Lyra moved closer, her mind entwining with his in that now familiar dance of thought and emotion. When I first met you, Commander, I thought you the embodiment of everything cold and rigid about Terrans. When you silenced me in that corridor, I was humiliated and furious. And I thought you the quintessential entitled royal, Kalen admitted, using privilege as a weapon, with no regard for rules or consequences. We were both right, in some ways, she said with unexpected humor, and completely wrong in others. Through their link flowed the full context of their journey, from that first confrontation where she had spat in his face and he had silently gagged her, through their reluctant partnership, to this moment of profound connection neither could have imagined. The memory of that initial encounter now carried layers of irony and significance that transformed it from a diplomatic incident into the unexpected beginning of something extraordinary. What happens now? Kalen asked, practical as always, even as their shared consciousness explored possibilities beyond conventional boundaries. My father has extended our diplomatic mission by 3 months, Lyrazier replied. Officially, to continue negotiations regarding the artifacts. Unofficially, she left the thought unfinished, but through their link, Kaelin received her meaning clearly. Ambassador, Zor suspected something of their bond and was providing time for them to determine its implications. In your duties as House Zor's diplomatic successor, a flash of complicated emotion, duty, ambition, rebellion, hope. Perhaps this connection offers a different kind of diplomatic future than either of our governments has envisioned. The first Cthar-human neural bond in recorded history. It has significance beyond our personal circumstances. Kaelin considered this, his natural caution balanced against the undeniable potential. A bridge between worlds, he said finally, built from the inside out. Exactly. Her eyes held the certainty of someone who had found an unexpected path, but recognized it as the right one. We began as adversaries, became reluctant allies, and now stand as something unprecedented in the history of our species. If that's not diplomatic progress, I don't know what is. As they stood together at the viewport, watching distant ships navigate the complex patterns of interstellar commerce and diplomacy, they sensed in each other the same resolution. To explore not just the practical applications of their neural bond, but its deeper meanings for themselves and for the future of human-Kithar relations. The Viridian Nexus continued its silent rotation against the backdrop of stars, a shimmering symbol of what could be built between different worlds. Within its corridors, two minds touched across the boundaries of biology and culture, creating a connection that had begun with conflict but evolved into harmony, proving that even the most profound divisions could be bridged by understanding, respect, and the courage to embrace the unknown. What had started with a princess crossing the line and a commander's controlled response had transformed into something neither diplomacy nor science had anticipated, a shared consciousness that might, in time, help heal the ancient wounds between their peoples and forge a path toward a truly unified future. In crossing that line together, they had found not boundaries but possibilities,